Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started here today. My name is Abby. I'm the Director of Education Services here at the Durham. And you are joining us for our second in a series of virtual roundtable events to go with the exhibit that you see on display behind me. This exhibit is called 40 Chances, Finding Hope in a Hungry World. We've had it on display for a couple of months here, and it's just here for about 2 more weeks. So hopefully you can join us for some of our 2 other segments in this series the next couple of Thursdays, and also come see the exhibit. The exhibit features several photographs that Howard D. Buffett took. He went to 137 different countries as a part of this project, and his hope was to raise awareness about the hunger crisis and kind of this global campaign. The exhibit itself is divided into 7 sections. So if you joined us last week, we talked about the sections of hunger and water. Today, we're going to talk about the 2 sections where the topics are guns and fear. Next week, we will cover women and poverty. And all of these topics are depicted as how they relate to or affect hunger and the food crisis around the world. And then we certainly hope you'll join us on the 27th, I believe is the final one, for the last section, which is actually behind me here, about hope. So the exhibit concludes with a final section about the word hope and what hope we have to solving some of these issues or making some progress towards them. So this series, our hope with this series is that we can kind of bring this global campaign to a more local level. And so to do that, we've engaged experts from several organizations throughout the community. And we have 2 here with us today to help us tackle these subjects that I mentioned of guns and fear. So with us, we have Dr. Eric Meyer from Creighton University, and then also Rich Gonzalez from PACE. And I'm going to just ask them to start by telling us a little bit about themselves and their organization as kind of an introduction to the panel. So I think I'll start by turning it over to Eric, if you would like to go first and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Okay, well, thank you, Abby, for inviting me to this. This matches my research agenda well, so it's a pleasure for me to speak here today to the beautiful photographs or stark emotional photographs that we're about to discuss. Again, my name is Eric Meyer. I'm actually from Omaha, Nebraska. I was a police officer here in Nebraska in 2 different agencies, Lincoln and Omaha, for about 17, 18 years. In 2010, I left the Omaha Police Department to pursue my education. I have a bachelor's in legal studies, an MA from the University of Chicago in sociology, an MA in criminology from University of Nebraska at Omaha, and my doctorate, my PhD is actually from the College of Public Health at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in disease prevention and social behavioral health. And instead of researching biological maladies such as COVID that we're experiencing now, I do more of the social illnesses such as crime and victimization. My research agenda includes researching what's traditionally thought of as criminal justice topics, such as violence, gun violence, victimization, but I do it through the lens of public health. So it's more through prevention and intervention than it is a reaction. But my primary research agenda is actually how art is used to affect social change. I do have some examples. Is that okay that I share them, Abby?
Yes, please do. You should be able to do that because I made you a co-host. So see if you can pull that up.
Yeah. So, do you see the slides?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So through the years, I've been taking various photographs of subject matter that kind of depicts what life is like or what people are going through, to try to give a visual to the narrative. I mean, we often hear statistics and research that discusses in writing what's going on, but rarely do we actually visually see this. So these photographs are an example of what I'm trying to capture This here, if you go through North Omaha, you'll see a lot of vacant lots of houses that have been torn down, and the only remnants left behind are like the front porch steps that lead up to just an empty lot. And it's almost like a ghostly image of that. You know, this was somebody's home where they celebrated Christmases and birthdays and, you know, and life in general. And here, all that's left of it is just an empty lot with the stairs as a reminder. So, you know, I'm not going to discuss every photograph in general, but this is taken at a scene of a homicide in Omaha where the body was taken. There was a chain link fence, and you can see the cityscape of the skyline of Omaha. This is a shot I took. It was just very descriptive to me of what, you know, organizations. There's a lot of organizations out there trying to do a lot of good, and they are doing a lot of good, but there are reminders that life is different in parts of the city than others. This was taken at a homicide scene, and after they moved the body, I laid in the street where the body was and pointed my camera up and thinking that this might be the last image that this victim actually saw before his death. This playground is no longer there. It's been replaced with apartment complexes, but this is a playground, a basketball court that was just overgrown and obviously not used. In Omaha, I do a lot of work in Chicago. We're all familiar with the roadside memorials that we see along the highway and the interstate of tragic car accidents, but you go to certain parts of the city and you'll see the same sort of memorials, but they're not for car accidents, they're for shooting victims. There's a homicide scene. Just more images of what life is like. You know, we see signs of no loitering, but if you're homeless, what does that mean? I mean, you know, people don't want you loitering, but for all essence, they're living on the street, so it's hard to escape it. The last image was taken during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement 2 summers ago. I was in Atlanta, and I followed religiously the crowds and the protest rallies and took a lot of pictures. And you can see here, it's not really my art that I'm showing, but it's the posters, the t-shirts, the banners that other people are using that I call art, and it's being used to try to affect social change. So really, that's where I'm coming from at it, as far as a research angle of what we're talking about. And the photographs that we were going to look at today kind of mirrors and does the same thing that I'm trying to do.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, we'll get to those photographs in just a second as well. Rich, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and PACE?
Yeah, Abby, thank you. My name is Rich Gonzalez, and I'm the director at PACE, which is Police Athletics for Community Engagement. It's a nonprofit that offers free sports to kids or youth from 7-year-olds to 18 in hopes to keep them off the streets, keep them out of trouble, and build the bridges between law enforcement and the police, which we know over the last couple of years has heightened quite a bit. I spent 26 years with the Omaha Police Department, retired in 2017, and that's when I came to PACE, so we're going on 5 years here. We offer the free sports through to inner city youth and at-risk disadvantaged youth within the city. Over the last, and those of you that may have kids or grandkids at this point that play athletics, the pay to play athletics pretty much washed out youth athletics in the inner city. So when we seen this several years ago, we took over a lot of grass areas and baseball fields, soccer fields, and started taking care of them ourselves and turning them from weeds to actually baseball fields and soccer fields in an attempt to give our youth in the inner city the opportunity to that others have in other parts of the city or other parts of the United States. So we felt that was important, and athletics really is the hook. The free athletics is the hook to get the kids in, and then we take it from there. And Most of our teams are coached by police, but recently, over the last couple of years, we have brought in other community members because not all kids want to be police officers. So we also have first responders, we have community members, anything from doctors to nurses to athletic directors that come coach as well. Just different parts of the city and different parts of the metro to bring in other folks so that these kids have different mentors and not just police officers. So right now we're at about, before COVID, we were at about 6,500 kids. And when I say at-risk kids and disadvantaged kids, it's not just when people think North and South Omaha. If we were to show our participation areas, we have kids now from Sarpy County, from Council Bluffs, all the way out to Elkhorn, in areas that kids just can't afford to pay to play sports that are being offered today. And so that's pretty much what we do. And we were fortunate to get through COVID and still be able to offer the kids opportunities, because as we know, everything that's happened recently with even with the COVID and I apologize, Abby and I were going back and forth, and I was just able to look at some of these photos today. But I will do my best to talk about them when we start this.
No problem. That works for us. So let's go ahead. What I'm going to do here for the participants, I'm going to turn my camera around and do just kind of a wide angle of this first section, and then we'll zoom in on a couple of particular photos for some reflections as well. So the first section that we're going to talk about is the section in the exhibit that is entitled Guns. And what I'd like to do is just start by reading you the exhibit description so that you have kind of Howard Buffett's own words about this section. So he says, conflict is the world's leading cause of hunger. War creates refugees, orphans, and child soldiers. It lays ruin to crops and livestock and leaves chaos and famine in its wake. While some conflicts are front page news, others are forgotten. These photos expose the connection between guns and hunger from in countries from Bosnia to Burundi. And so, Eric, I'm going to, bear with me here, I'm going to get a little bit closer, and I think one of the photos that you were hoping to chat about was this first one. Could you tell us a little bit about why you chose this one? I have in my notes that this is taken in Bangladesh in 2001.
You know, the description is that this is a boy with his gun to his head who is in the middle of an area that's doing a lot of gun running. And although this is in Bangladesh, I see a lot of parallels, not just from this picture, all the photographs, but specifically this one. I see some parallels to what we're experiencing, you know, in the U.S. and even here in Omaha, Nebraska, where gun running, you know, it's a business. It's a business based on supply and demand. And this business, this system surfaces in these areas when people are limited in their opportunities, and in essence, the mainstream society system has not provided for them and in fact failed them. They create their own, right? They create their own innovative methods to not just survive, because all of us have a need not to just survive, but to thrive and to flourish. And this picture here of this young man, this boy holding a gun to his head is done, you know, it comes off as a joke, but what it's saying to me that guns and has just become part of the social norm in this area, that it's nothing that causes a big reaction, and in fact it could be used in a humorous way. That is so opposite to what many of us feel about what guns are. I mean, you know, you don't see anybody in this picture specifically worried about that he's pointing a gun to his head, but it causes me, you know, it causes me to have a very emotional reaction to what life it must be like for this young man and for the people in this community, that they're using guns to make a living, they're using guns, either by selling them or through violence to deal with and to try to provide for themselves and their loved ones in this area, which is completely reversed from mainstream society. And we can see that here. We can see that how guns are just part of the background, part of the scenery in certain communities, and that they use these weapons as tools to try to improve their situation.
Well said. Thank you, Eric. You know, it's interesting that you chose these two photos. I'll go over to this next one now because this one definitely does not come across as quite so casual, but it does still feature some pretty young subjects. You want to talk a little bit about this one?
Yeah, I mean, Buffett wrote that these young men have never experienced peace and stability, which I have no doubt is true. When I meet people who have been incarcerated, who have been involved in violence, and as a society, we expect for them to take personal responsibility for whatever crimes they have committed, and I'm in agreement with that to some point. But at the other end of the spectrum, it's no surprise, right? That if you have never experienced peace and stability, how else are they supposed to react? It's almost like their future has already been written. And I'm sure Rich, through his policing career, I know I have in mind that unfortunately there are times where you meet a youth and you think to yourself that, gosh, this kid just does not have a chance. You can already see his future, that it's not going to be great for him, and that is possibly that he'll be victimized, or that he'll hurt somebody else, or that he'll lead a life in incarceration. And it's so unfortunate. And I can see that despair in these children's eyes. And you hope you're wrong, but reality is, in this community, is there is no hope. There's no peace and stability. So this is just part of life.
Yeah, Rich, I'm wondering if you have any reflections on that, as it relates to your time with your current organization or on the force itself.
No, Eric, that you're spot on that, brother. When I look at those two particular photos, and we're looking at other areas of the world, but when you bring it into our world here within the US, and I'm not going to pick on and say Omaha, but I'll just say other poverty-stricken areas within the US. And we talk about this a lot. When you look at that photo number one, and we're trying to change the culture in these high-risk areas, this is what these kids see. They look like they're having fun. They have a gun, and the folks that they're probably looking up to are the folks that are selling the guns. They're the folks that are driving the nice vehicles. They're the folks that are pulling out a bunch of money and showing money to these kids. And those are becoming, in a lot of these areas, what those kids want to become. And so that's what we're trying to do, is change that culture, because they see those drug dealers and they see those kids that are selling guns. They see those kids that have a lot of money, and that's who they're looking up to, a lot of them. But then you go into the second photo, and that's the rest of the community. Those are the ones that are being affected by it. Those are the kids that are not doing that are seeing the violence. They're seeing the gun violence. They're seeing the addiction that's going on in their neighborhoods. So I think what Eric said was spot on, and you can bring that into the smaller areas of the United States and in the poverty-stricken areas, and it says the same thing, what's happening.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's switch over to the section on fear. So the panel we had last week was a little bit different in terms of the two topics. I don't think were quite so obviously connected, or were more obviously connected in terms of hunger and water. So we talked a lot about water and how it affects crops, for example, and livestock. I think it's pretty obvious how guns and fear are connected, but I think with this section, there's also some information about other sources of fear. It's not just violence. So I'll turn my camera around again here. The section on fear says this. Buffett says millions of people around the world live in fear of hunger, disease, and war. Starving children are shackled and forced to beg. Survivors of genocide are haunted by the memories of their families being slaughtered. Parents see their children succumb to AIDS. If you're trapped in a world with no hope for change, you are under siege. So Eric, let's start with you again. I believe this is one of the photos that you kind of wanted to highlight, taken in Senegal in 2001.
Yeah, this picture is actually very difficult for me to look at, and I guess it's supposed to be, right? I mean, this isn't an image that you want framed in your house, but this is reality for this youth, where in the narrative it says that if this child, often many of the parents put their children in religious schools, and specifically this child, when he was at school, he was forced to go out onto the streets to beg. And if he returns with insufficient funds, or he tries to run away, or that if he tries to disobey the rules or anything like that, they shackle him, right? And I see similarities here in the U.S., where many of the youths are living in impoverishment. They're living in poor communities, and they're trying to escape. And they don't have the opportunities like most of us, a lot of us have, of going to school, getting an education, getting a job, obtaining our life American dream through the traditional methods. They try to do it through more innovative methods that we consider criminal. And when they're trying to escape through these methods, how does society react to them? Well, we react with judgment, and we want these people to take personal responsibilities for their actions. And the main way we do that is through incarceration, through actually confining them. I'm not against, part of me believes that people do have to take responsibility, and if they do hurt someone or commit a crime, they do, have to pay the consequence. But I believe there should be equality, that time should be higher in quality, that they should be taught and given the tools and provided therapy and rehabilitation, so that when they leave those areas of confinement, that they're able to flourish in ways that are more healthy to them and to the community. To see this poor young guy just shackled because he doesn't want to go out and beg for money. He can't raise the money that's expected, or that he's trying to escape, is just really a stark reminder.
Rich, do you have anything to kind of add to those comments?
No, and it's I think some of the law enforcement background that Eric has and I have, I think our thoughts are very similar, and especially I did 20 years of my career doing gangs, guns, and drugs, and working mainly in those parts of the city. But what's interesting about this, I have a young Sudanese man that works with us right now. He's 24 years old. He came here from Sudan when he was 9. And before he went out to start working here, I showed him a couple of these pictures, and I just asked him what his thoughts were on it. And he said, what we talk about here at PACE is, and I'm not going to make this a PACE thing, but he said that it was opportunities. And he said he started out growing up in the projects when they first came here, and it was survival for them, especially against the local gangs. So when the opportunities are there for the kids, and he was fortunate to have somebody pull him in and give him an opportunity to play basketball, and it pulled him out of that. But he said along with that is we talked a little bit, and he talked about the poverty, and then with that, he also added that coming from Sudan, he's been back there. He left when he was 9 years old, but he knew a lot more than than an average 14 or 15-year-old would, having to grow up over there. And he said that the mental health and the stability of a lot of these folks over there is another major concern. He just said there's so many folks, what over there we'd call them crazy, over here we talk about mental health. And he said it's just rampant over there, and combine all that together and it's just chaos with everything happening.
Well,
If I can,
something,
if I
oh,
can add
please,
one
Eric,
thing,
yeah.
Abby.
Please.
You know what, I spoke to a few months ago, I spoke to a 16-year-old male who was in a correctional facility for homicide. And he had committed the homicide when he was 13. And he was sentenced when he was 14 to, it was a big number. It was, 70 some years. And I couldn't wrap my head around that, somebody 16 years old had such a big sentence, and neither could this child. He was taking barbering classes, he was taking cooking classes, he was trying to learn a trade. And when you asked him why he was trying to do this, his main motivation was so that he could do better when he's released. Well, the reality is he's not even going to be eligible for parole until he's into his late 60s or early 70s. And unfortunately, when we look at the statistics of inmates, most of them don't live that long. They just don't. And to see somebody whose future essentially his life is going to be one in confinement, and what he can't even really wrap his mind around why, because when he did the crime, he was so young. He came from a harsh background. It's not acceptable, but it's not a surprise either. And when I look at this picture, I sort of see the same thing. This kid is being confined. He's being shackled for wanting nothing more than something different than what he's living.
Something that kind of struck me about this section and looking at the photos that you all chose to talk about in 1, 2, 3, 4, in all but one, I guess, the subject, or at least one of the subjects, are children. But I think in this second one that you picked to talk about, Eric, let me get a better view here. Sorry about that. It actually features a grandparent and grandchild. And that made me think, my first thought, and I'm a former teacher, so my first thought in this section was about the fear that the children had. But I can't imagine. I am not a parent, I will admit, and I can't imagine the fear that parents have knowing they have children who are growing up in some of these scenarios, or grandparents in this case. So do you want to talk a little bit about this photo, Eric?
The grandmother holding her grandchild here struck me as well. We are seeing a transition in communities where grandparents are playing a much larger role in raising their grandchildren than we have in past generations. For whatever reason, whether the parents are incarcerated, whether they're dead, or whether they're gone. This picture reminded me, when I was doing some research in a youth correctional center, part of the research requirements is that I get parental permission because all these youths were under the age of 19. But I couldn't. Every time I asked a child, one of the inmates, how I could get a hold of their parents to ask permission, most of the answers were, I don't know, or my parents are in prison. And they didn't have anybody, not even the prison didn't even consider them to be children, even though they've been adjudicated as adults. The prison didn't even collect the parents' information. Yeah, and these kids are just left on their own. The other thing that this picture reminded me of is you can just see the level of stress on the grandmother's face. People who live in communities that they perceive to be violent are absolutely affected by their perception. They suffer higher levels of stress which we can see physically. We can see them have high blood pressure. We can see them have higher rates of cancer, higher rates of heart disease, more prone to anxiety and depression. In all essence, many of these individuals who live in communities, even though they are upstanding, law-abiding citizens, they have symptoms of PTSD. They don't go for walks because they're scared of being shot. That could lead to other health problems and mental health problems. We all need to get outside and get some sunshine. It's good for you to go out and meet your neighbors and socialize with them. But if you can't because of your fears, that's going to affect your whole world. It's going to affect your health. It's going to affect your children's health. And I see that in her face. And I see, I was part of a research group in Chicago where they were putting up exercise equipment in parks in impoverished neighborhoods. And none of this exercise equipment was being used, and the researchers were confused as to why. All I had to do was talk to the people who lived in that community, and they said, well, this park had a history of drug dealing, had a history of being violent, even though that reputation in essence had been had dissolved over the years. That perception was still there, right? And it took another type of intervention to get people to have trust in these now safe communities that they were able to come out into and to enjoy it. And even then, they were still skeptical. Right. I mean, there's just not really any win for anybody. Even if you're a law-abiding citizen, you're still affected by the violence. I lived, in fact, I just moved last year. I lived in North Omaha, and to experience what it was like, and just hearing the police helicopter nightly, I could tell my blood pressure was increasing. Just hearing the sirens, and on a hot summer's night, you could actually hear gunfire on a routine basis. Driving through the community and seeing the police tape, that all these things have an effect on you, right? Even though you're not part of it, you still are. It's hard to escape it.
Rich, do you have anything to add about this one? Or
No, just in short, when looking at these photos, that was one particular one that stood out to him as well. And he just mentioned about the how everybody else had to take care of the kids because his father, like many fathers, joined the military. And so the only thing you had to do over there, he says, join military. So they're with their aunts, their grandmothers, and others. And that was just their form of protection while his dad and his uncles and everybody were joining the military. And he said most of the folks that join the military, they do it to protect their family over there because that's where the guns are coming from. And that's where you're going to have a gun to try to protect your family. But, I agree with what Eric said. But you talk about just over here and you bring that into the US, and it's very similar where there's poverty. And where there's poverty, there's a lot of guns, there's violence. And, many grandparents do end up having to take care of kids because of incarceration.
And Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but we know that for the kids that don't have a grandparent or don't have a parent or don't have reliable guardianship, they often turn to joining a gang because you can't escape the need for wanting to be safe and for protection. And if that's all you have, that's all you have.
Absolutely correct.
And I think for me, this exhibit really highlights that list. We all learn about it at some point in a psychology class of those basic needs that every human has and how they're so interconnected. And so this week's roundtable in particular was really of interest to me because of all the topics, it's probably the two, guns and fear, that maybe locally at least, you think of war-torn countries and all these things abroad, and you may be associated with poverty and hunger, but I don't know if we always make that connection locally to what fear is doing to our community and how it does affect those basic needs of like Eric said, having somebody in your life and hunger and poverty. So we have a little bit of time left here. The last thing before we wrap up, I wanted to just kind of pose one additional question to Eric and Rich. And I mentioned this at the beginning that, we tried to choose topics that went together. And I think Eric started kind of talking about this a little bit, how that fear can affect other parts of your life. But maybe offer some comments on just how these two topics really go together locally for us. How do guns and fear affect our community in tandem? And what are some things, again, we've referenced the pandemic a couple times. We know things are exacerbated because of that. So what are some things that we're seeing locally right now related to these two topics?
Did you want me to start?
Sure,
Yeah, go ahead, Eric, that's fine.
Well, even when you talk about your past topics like hunger and food, I mean, none of these things exist in a vacuum. They kind of affect each other. I mean, they absolutely do affect each other. If you have a lack of opportunities and lack of parenting and all these other things, it's going to affect not just criminal activity. It's going to affect, food insecurities. It's going to affect lack of physical activity. It's going to affect a lot of other things that can be harmful to not just the individual, but to the community in general. So when we look at these, these photographs, and I can't help but still look at these photographs, especially the little girl in the fear, the fear and distress in her eyes. These are the consequences that we don't often see. These are the consequences in the community that we don't see. We see the people that are committing the violence. We blast their mugs all over the news, and we judge them harshly. We mention the victims. Depending on who they are, they get, what exposure they get. But then there are often these bystanders, right? These the people who just live in the community who are experiencing a lot of stress. There's been some great public health research that shows that in certain communities, in urban areas in the US, that young men at age 12 are now starting to take blood pressure medication. This is stuff that we've never seen before. And why are they taking blood pressure medication? It's because their stress levels are high. And it's because their diet is poor. It's because they're not getting the type of exercise that we got as a kid. And it just kind of spirals and snowballs and progresses. And unless something's done, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which we can see in our prison system with over 2.2 million people incarcerated in the US right now.
Rich?
No, same thing. I'd probably, I'm with Eric on this, and I think the pandemic and what's been happening over the last year and a half, I think has really pushed a lot of this fear and hunger out of the inner city. So you can only imagine what's happening in the inner city, and let's move out just to even middle income, and what's happening with no jobs and lack of exercise and the kids being, first of all, we try to get kids out of the house anyways, the video games and everything, that these kids are locking themselves in their room and not getting out, and then throw this in there. And Eric brings up a good point about exercise, just getting out and doing the things we did, during this past year. Every year for several years, we would order the same size. We wouldn't have to have the kids send in their size of shirts and pants. We knew at this age we needed this size. At this age, 11 to 12, we needed this size. And so we ordered it this past year, and it seems like about 80% of the kids we had to move up a size for every age group. So just the health and wellness part of it, along with the mental health and everything that's happening citywide. I imagine how that is over in the countries that we're seeing these photos from, when they don't have the resources or near the opportunities that we have to try to fix it. So that's all I have on that.
Thank you. So in our last couple minutes here, I just wanted to circle back to each of you before I wrap up. These are heavy topics. These are all four of these. I imagine even really our last one about hope is a heavy exhibit. But we hope, and the reason we're doing this and trying to bring these conversations to a local level to try to help people continue to learn, including myself and ourselves here at the museum. And, perhaps inspire people to get involved or learn more. So if you could each just kind of share if people are interested in, something you said sparked their attention, or they want to get involved or learn how they might be able to help with some of these local issues. What should they do? Maybe tell how they can get a hold of you or somebody in your organization if they're interested.
What I do is a little bit, well, it's much different than what Rich is doing. I'm not a boots on the ground in the community trying to do an intervention. What my role is actually to evaluate the interventions that are being done to see if they're making progress and then offer my services to them. But despite that, you don't have to do what I do, and I don't expect anybody to. But it is important for people to become involved. We can't depend on, well, we already know that we just can't depend on the government to provide for what I feel that they should provide. So where do we turn? We turn to people. We just turn to the citizens, and fortunately people are very generous, and they are more than willing to donate. But it's harder now, right? Because of COVID. We're seeing that there's a drop in volunteering in the community. There's a drop in people donating money because of inflation and because things are just kind of wacko right now. But despite the hard times we're going through, this is actually an indicator that we should become most involved, right? This is a time where we really should reach out and help, because it does make a difference. What Rich is doing is great, but if that was the only intervention happening in the community, it wouldn't do anything. But with PACE and with One World, with other, like No More Empty Pots, with all these other organizations working in collaboration together, they do make big strides.
No, you're right on that, Eric. It's we have many partners, many folks that we partner with to get this done, and no one nonprofit obviously can do it all. On our side of it, it comes down to the numbers that are growing. So on our side of it, it's the numbers growing, but lack of funding, as Eric says, in some tough times, we're still working with the short staff. We have, with PACE, we have soccer, football, baseball, CrossFit. We added CrossFit a couple of years ago as the pandemic came around, and it's volunteerism and hoping to get folks that have the time and can come out and volunteer and coach, or just work in the fields, or just come around and work at our snack shack, and that's the way we're getting things done over here.
Yeah.
So it's the only way you can get it done. With
one of the biggest things that I see that local nonprofits are accomplishing that really doesn't get a lot of attention because it's a hard measure to accomplish is that they give people hope. And hopelessness is actually the most common theme when I talk to inmates in prison. Hopelessness is the most common theme I see. They don't have a lot of hope. And this is reflected in their mental health and their physical health. We have to remember that out of the over 40,000 people a year who die at the hand of a gun, more than half of those individuals die from suicide. And people who die from suicide are hopeless, right? So it is important to have these organizations out there who provide that light at the end of the tunnel. We're seeing populations who weren't known to have high rates of suicide now having increasing the rates of suicide, like young Black males. And that's stark, right? And we're talking about a population has become very resilient to living in poverty, unfortunately. But even then, they've reached their limit, and without hope, who has, a motivation to even get out of bed?
And Abby, with PACE, we work with a lot of organizations. One thing being with the Omaha Police Department at the time, and our gang unit, I'll go several years back, probably the early 2000s. We really didn't catch when the Sudanese started coming over here to Omaha. And we didn't catch that on time. And then there was the ability where and you'll talk to the young man that works for me, is that was your way of survival. You had to form your own gang, and we had to be against the other gangs. But the fortunate thing is we found some partnerships out there where we are connecting with a lot of the refugees that are coming into Omaha right away. And we're on top of giving them opportunities to come play athletics. Most of them soccer. At any given day down at our soccer field, you're going to have 8 to 10 languages being spoken, from Burmese to Korean, Somali, the Sudanese, and there's some that I don't even know. You know, some of the languages that I first heard of being here in Omaha. And obviously OPS is packed with, I want to say 300 different languages in OPS, somewhere around there. But that's kind of what we're doing too, is connecting with a lot of the refugees that are coming here to offer them the opportunities to keep them away from that, what the norm would be. And that's joining together to protect yourself against our local gangs.
Yeah, I know on my end, if there's anything I've learned in the last couple of years, it's how local organizations need to and really have to work together to make change in the community. And that's a perfect note to end on, because I'm super grateful for all the organizations participating in these roundtables. It's, I think, really important for museums like us to engage the experts on topics like this, especially when we want to try to bring them to a local level. So I'm super grateful. Thank you so much, Rich and Eric. Next week, we have, I believe, 3 additional organizations or representatives participating in the final 2-topic panel, which is about women and poverty, which I think will be a really interesting discussion. And so we hope you'll consider joining us for that, as well as the final roundtable event on the 27th, where we will culminate with the topic of hope. And if you haven't come to see the exhibit, we certainly hope you will. It's on display through January 30th. So thank you, Rich and Eric. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.